really?
Yes, although it's hard for me to imagine wanting to listen to an hour again of this, but yes, they're being recorded. You just have to ask the office. And actually, I want to lead, for those of you who are on the call, Donna and Susan are on the call as well this morning, and I had intended to share a program that's coming up in the beginning of February. I shared it on Saturday morning, but neglected to do so on Friday. So I wonder, just as we're getting started, Donna or Susan, if you would just let people know about the program that is upcoming.
We are, thank you. We are doing right now, as of now, a 3-part series on racism and health disparities in our community. And we have really like the A-list of speakers lined up. Our first speaker on February 1st is Dr. Linda Clark, who's the president of the Black Physicians Network, and she's going to be giving us an overview of that very topic. Second speaker will be talking about maternal health and the rate at which Black women actually die from complications. It's like 3 or 4 times the amount of white women. And her name is Sharita Bullock, and she is the executive director of Healthy Baby Network. And then we're going to do a mental health.
What date was that? You didn't mention the date.
The first one is February 1st. The second one is February 16th.
Okay.
And everything will be on the website, and everything will be in snippets, so you can look there again. I wanted to make sure at least.
You.
Yeah, no, for the first one, please, thank you. Let us know about the third one, and then we'll get started, if you would.
Yeah, we haven't firmed up the speaker, so I don't want to say, but it'll be sometime in March. Thank you.
Yeah, great. Thank you. And stay tuned. We will discuss it also. It'll come up in announcements on Friday nights and Saturday mornings too. Look in the bulletin and the snippets. There's a whole bunch of really good, important programming that is being set out for the congregation in the next couple of months. All germane and all incredibly important for us to pay attention to. I'm going to mute everybody for now. But you have the option to unmute yourself if you have a question, and I don't see a hand that's up. So please feel free to unmute yourself when needed. And also, if you would, please just mind when you accidentally become unmuted and we hear your dog barking in the background. We've had that at Life Cycle events too. Always fun. I'm happy to see you. Each time we have the opportunity to learn together. Bernice, you asked last week if you missed anything. I tongue in cheek said just the beginning, because we literally talked about Genesis, and really that was the beginning of our story, right? That was the whole beginning of our people, of our story, of who we are. And this is the continuation. The book of Exodus, the second book in the Torah, is after God's proverbial disappointments with us in Genesis. We then move to God choosing us as a particular people to be God's people, right? This is the book of Exodus, and this is where we see the transition of Abraham and Sarah as the ancestors of this nation to be into the rest of our story, right? And this is who we become physically as a people and spiritually as a people as well. So we are going to, I will screen share in just one moment, but let me see if there was anything else at all, any other questions that came up. I don't think so. Okay, was there anything at all from last week that needed your attention that we covered, and anything that needed more talk at all, or are we good to go right into Exodus? Good? Okay. So I will screen share, endeavor to do it so that you can see it well. Yes, thumbs up, can you see? Yeah, good, okay. So this is This is our second book, right? So we go into Exodus, in Hebrew called Shemot, which means, as we know, right? This is the when we look at the whole layout of the Pentateuch, of the 5 books, you'll see here, if you can see my cursor, last week we looked at Genesis. This week we're looking at Exodus, in English called Exodus, in Hebrew called Shemot. Exodus is derived from the Greek, I'm not going to say it right, but Exodus, you'll see this word right here, Egyptu, and you probably, if you hear it or read it, you can see, right, it looks like the word Egypt, right, and it is our story of our Exodus from Egypt, right. It later became understood to be the Sefer Yetziat Mitzrayim. Those are words probably that sound familiar to you, Yetziat Mitzrayim, which is words that we hear at Pesach time, or it comes in our Haggadah. It is our leaving, our exodus from the book, from Egypt, right? So in Hebrew, we say Shemot, but in English, we say Exodus. Exodus and Shemot actually are not translations for one another. Shemot is actually the plural name, the plural word for names. Right, so Shemot means names. And if you recall last week, we talked that each book gets its title from the first word or first couple of words of the opening passage of the story. So the book of Shemot, the second book of the Bible, actually begins with the words, these are the names, okay? So far, so good? Okay. So here's the outline of the book of Exodus. In our weekly Torah cycle, right? So when we begin with Genesis at the beginning of our cycle, this is our 13th weekly Torah reading. All told, the entire book of Exodus is 40 chapters. 40 chapters. It doesn't mean that there are 40 readings, but the whole book itself of Exodus is 40 chapters, and then they are chunked together into 11 parshiot, or 11 sections that are read one section each of the 11 weeks. Okay, so those 40 chapters, there might be 2 or 3, we're going to look at them, more closely in a couple minutes, but 2 or 3 chapters that are put into one parsha, one sedra, one portion, one Torah portion for the week. Okay, and likely in all likelihood comes to us from the latter part of the 13th century. The writings that we find in the book of Exodus are a combination of some biographical work, some narrative work, some poetry, some pretty critical laws for us, and a recording of names and events, right? Often the case, some books have more of a concentration, some of the 5 books have more of a concentration on law and poetry in particular. All of them have narrative, but law and poetry are typically when we see some distinction within the 5 books. So the book of Exodus is one of those. This is where we see, if you look at the right-hand column, our real development of ourselves as a people. Creation was very particular in the book of Genesis. David, please go ahead.
Just other than the Song of Songs, what other poetry is in Exodus? Or
there's lots. We're going to get to it. Hold on, sit tight. It's a good question. And we're going to get there in just one minute. Okay. We have the development of the physical and the spiritual nature of us as a people in the book of Exodus. So this is in Genesis, where we started off just with the particulars, literally, of becoming, right, of human beings being created and animals being created. This is both who we are as a people, becoming as a people, and who we are meant to become as a people spiritually and ethically en route, right? You'll remember probably from some of your initial readings in the book of Exodus, we find our stories of Egyptian slavery and eventual liberation. We have revelation and we have our receiving of the Torah. We have our wanderings through the desert. And we have the receiving of our laws, and in particular, the 10 Commandments, right? Geographically, this book takes place both in Egypt and in the wilderness of Temple Sinai, and in the wilderness of Sinai, right? So these are the two geographical locations for the book of Exodus. Okay, so that's how it's broken down, and these are its major themes. So far, so good? Okay. Does everybody, by the way, does everybody know two things: how to raise your hand if you don't want to unmute, and how to increase, you know how to increase your view settings. For those of you who need a bigger screen, if you hover around the top of your screen and look at view options, if you need, you know, on my screen, it shows up full, the PowerPoint, but on yours, it might not. If you hover at the top of your screen, if you're not on an iPad, you'll see where it says view options. There's a drop down there, and you can increase the size of my presentation so that it works for you, okay? And raise a hand are I think your reactions for most of you. Yeah, okay. So there are, when we look at the entire book of Exodus, it can, you know, in broad brushstrokes be divided into three main sections. The first section is the oppression of Israel and our struggle for liberation, and then being liberated. This is from chapter 1 to about chapter 15, but halfway through chapter 15 and then some, right? So that's the first main theme in the book of Exodus. The second main theme is our travels to the Sea of Reeds to Sinai. And then the third part, our narrative, is really where we have the culmination of the book of Exodus and are becoming really, truly a people at Sinai. Okay. Any questions so far? No, good. Okay. So here we are. This is our very first portion. So let me just move this. This is Shemot. I think this is last week. Some of you actually were in services last week and for last Friday night, and Cantor Braun spoke about Shemot, about the importance of names. And this is both the title of the second book and also the opening words of our passage. So it's names. This is chapter, again, just as a reminder, when you look up here, for those who need a bit of a refresher, the first number before the colon is the chapter, right? So this is chapter 1 and this is chapter 6. And the second number after the colon is the verse. So this means Exodus 1:1 means we're starting at chapter 1, verse 1. And this portion, this Torah portion, takes us right through chapter 6, verse 1. Okay? So this is the first passage of the first parsha in Exodus is names, is literally Shemot. These are the names of the sons of Jacob and all those who come after him within I think it's about a 400 year time period or so. This is when we have a new king of Egypt who enslaves the Hebrews and orders their male children to be drowned in the Nile River. These are stories in all likelihood that you know, either, you know, maybe from your childhood or from Passover, right? Or from Passover. There's a Levite woman who places her son Moses in a basket on the Nile, where he is found by the daughter of Pharaoh and raised then in Pharaoh's house, right? And then we know about Moses fleeing to Midian after killing an Egyptian. If you've seen the movie, you know that scene as well. Moses marries Zipporah, the daughter of this Midian priest. They have a son named Gershom. And God calls Moses from a burning bush, right? A bush that burns but isn't consumed, and enlists him, charges him with freeing the Israelites from Egypt. Moses and Aaron request permission from Pharaoh for the Israelites to celebrate a festival in the wilderness, and Pharaoh refuses and makes life even harder for the Israelites, right? So we have some major themes. Yes, Lisa, please.
Just going back to the top there, and it says that it goes through chapter 6, verse 1.
Yeah.
And this makes me think that why don't you start a chapter and just give a first sentence? Is it meant to be like a cliffhanger? You know, you're watching an episode and like,
Right.
What's happening next?
Right. So it's a good question. Let me just open my text itself. Hold on. My Hold on one second.
It's actually what I read last week in services. It was literally, these are the names.
Yeah,
And it was each of the 12. And I think the fifth sentence says, and then they went down to Egypt. I mean, that was like
Right.
literally the 5 sentences.
it's exactly it. So thank you. First of all, the Torah text itself, right? It's divided by us. It doesn't come divided, right? It gets divided later on by the sages, right? And the last, Lisa, to your question, and Rebecca, to your point, the very first verse of chapter 6. So neither chapters nor verses existed in the original text, right? So the very last verse that we finish this parsha, this section, Shemot, with, is, and then the Eternal said to Moses, you shall soon see what I will do to Pharaoh. He shall let them go because of a greater might. Indeed, because of a greater might, he shall drive them from this land. Right? And that's probably where you stopped, Rebecca, right?
Mm-hmm.
And then we
Yeah.
pick up this week with Vayera. God spoke to Moses and said to him, right? It's a continuation of the story. So our edition of, Lisa, your question is a good one, right? Right. You would never, it would be akin to, right? You can't imagine picking up a fiction book and starting a new chapter, reading one sentence and then putting it down. Right? We wouldn't do that. But the breaks of the enumeration of the verses, right? All of that comes later, right? So the narrative itself, where they looked for breaks in the story, and then had to space it out accordingly so that we could do it within an annual cycle. Originally a triennial cycle, but then an annual cycle. Yes, Rebecca, we have another hand.
Yeah. So with the respect to the drowning of the firstborn children, was that going on all 400 years? Because it seems like the Jewish population would have been a lot smaller if it was.
And right. And what was the impetus for the drowning? Why were the male children to be drowned in the Nile River?
I don't remember.
Who can help her out with that?
Are we getting too numerous?
The Hittites were expelled.
Say it again, Susan.
Well, I was just wondering if it was a response, if we were getting too numerous or too strong or too powerful in some way.
Yeah. David, is that what you were going to say?
No, I mean, historically, my understanding was that that Jacob coming down was coincident with another Semitic tribe, the Hittites, taking over Egypt, and that once they were expelled and a native Egyptian resumed the throne of Pharaoh, the other Semitic tribes, which were the Israelites who came down with the Hittites or served as viziers, I think the term was, were marginalized. That's my understanding of the history, at least.
Okay. Judy?
Or maybe Hyksos, not Hittites.
Judy, go ahead. I think you're muted still.
Yeah. Wasn't there a prophecy that there would be a Jewish child who is going to lead the rebellion at some point? Or am I thinking of a different story?
Say it again.
I thought there was a prophecy that a Jewish child was going to lead a rebellion in the future, and that was why he was killing all the male sons.
Okay, so let's look. Does anybody have the text in front of them? Anybody have the biblical text in front of them? Okay, let me read for you. This is from Exodus chapter 1. Let me actually stop the share for 1 second, okay? Let me stop the share. No, does anybody, because I can see you better. Does anybody have the text in front of them? Okay, Susan, do you want to read from us? If you look, if not, I can read it. It's Exodus chapter 1, verse 8.
A new king arose over Egypt who did not know Joseph. So I'm in the right place, I hope?
Yep.
Okay. And he said to his people, look, the Israelite people are much too numerous for us. Let us deal shrewdly with them so that they may not increase. Otherwise, in the event of war, they may join our enemies in fighting against us and rise from the ground. So they set taskmasters over them to oppress them with forced labor, and they built garrison cities for Pharaoh, Pithom and Ramses. But the more they were oppressed, the more they increased and spread out, so that the Egyptians came to dread the Israelites.
Keep going. Yep.
Okay. The Egyptians ruthlessly imposed upon the Israelites the various labors that they made them perform. Ruthlessly, they made life bitter for them with harsh labor at mortar and bricks and with all sorts of tasks in the field. The king of Egypt spoke to the Hebrew midwives, one of whom was named Shiphrah, and the other Puah, saying,
Shiphrah and Puah, remember those names. They don't get enough screen time. They don't get enough naming. Shiphrah and Puah, they are heroines. Thanks, keep going, please.
Yep. Saying, when you deliver the Hebrew women, look at the birth stool. If it is a boy, kill him. If it is a girl, let her live. The midwives, fearing God, did not do as the king of Egypt had told them. They let the boys live. So the king of Egypt summoned the midwives and said to them, why have you done this thing, letting the boys live? The midwives said to Pharaoh, because the Hebrew women are not like the Egyptian women. They are vigorous. Before the midwife can come to them, they have given birth. And God dealt with the midwives, and the people multiplied and increased greatly. And because the midwives feared God, he established households for them. Then Pharaoh charged all his people, saying, every boy that is born you shall throw into the Nile, but let every girl live. The chapter break.
Yeah, chapter break, thank you, and organic break as well, okay? So that is, does that answer your question? Does that answer your question? Right, too numerous, right, too numerous. We were procreating too quickly, right? And Pharaoh was worried, right? He was worried, right? And we were talking about this yesterday morning as well, that this was one of the first instances that we see a real power struggle, right? In leadership and a deep worry about who's going to rule the land, right? And how prolific their ability was, right? Right. Let me come back to. Okay. I'm only worried in terms of timing that we won't get through everything. So let me go to the next one and then I'll come back and answer any questions that you have. Okay, hold on one second. Okay, so this is our parsha that we read yesterday, Vayera. This is, right, and the parentheses, right, Vayera, the Hebrew up top, literally means appeared, comes from the word from roeh, to see, and then the parentheses, right, God and to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. These are our subjects so that we know. So it's God appeared to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. That's how this parsha, this section, gets its name. So despite God's message that the Israelites will be redeemed from slavery, they are critical, right? They are skeptical, rather, right? They knowing what they know, they're not at all confident that this is going to happen. And God instructs Moses and Aaron to deliver the Israelites from the land of Egypt. In fact, we looked at this yesterday. God says to Moses, "You be an Elohim. You be," right? The English translation is a Lord, but you be like, right? You know that word Elohim. We use it in our prayer context. You be a God. Right, so we see this tension between Pharaoh and Moses. Aaron becomes a spokesperson as well and becomes a kind of intermediary for the people, encouraging them, right? And Aaron, we know as well, has to use his magic, right? He makes his rod into he strikes his rod, it becomes a serpent, right? This is for those of you who are visual learners, this is a great portion to read. And this is where we see that the miracles and the beginning of the plagues and the hardening of Pharaoh's heart, right? This is the first 7 plagues. It is an especially difficult portion to read for any number of reasons, but there are those who are reading it now and who wonder both about the notion of plagues and our being in COVID time and its eerie coincidence, and also the hardening of hearts, right? Well, what it looks like to have a recalcitrant leader who is shown time and again about might. The might of a God, our God in this case, and is recalcitrant. And then the questions arise about who is it that's hardening Pharaoh's heart? Is it Pharaoh himself, or is it God? And what is God's role in all of this? So this is the second portion of all the ones that we read in the book of Shemot. Any questions on Vayera? Okay. The third portion is called Bo, which literally means go, and it means go to Pharaoh. This takes us from chapter 10 of Exodus through to chapter 13. This is when, right, this is the section that our kids like at the Seder table, right? This is when the kids like it, nobody else really likes it because it's creepy. God sends the plagues of locusts and darkness to Egypt and warns Moses about the final awful plague, the death of every Egyptian firstborn, and still Pharaoh remains unyielding, right? Unyielding. This is our proof text for Passover. Proof text, by the way, every law that we have, just about every traditionally rooted custom that we have, things that are newer like confirmation or baby namings for girls, but all of our traditional observances and all of our festivals have what's called a proof text. It means that its rootedness comes to us somewhere from the Torah, right? Every single thing that we do, all of our laws, you might have to dig for them, but they always come from the Torah text at some point. This is our proof text for Passover, right? This is where we find the commands about Passover and its particulars, its dates and things like that. God enacts the final plague, striking down all the firstborn in the land, all in Egypt, except we know those from the house of Israel. And this is finally the sign that is convincing enough for Pharaoh to allow the Israelites to leave. And speaking to Moses and Aaron, God repeats the commandments about Passover, right? So we have this, right? This is, and we know in biblical texts when we have a repetition, that is to draw our attention to, it's kind of like you would use a highlighter, right? When God repeats something or when our text repeats something, it means pay attention, right? Pay attention, it's noteworthy. It's noteworthy. Good so far? Beshalach, this is when Pharaoh finally lets the people go. This is the continuation of our narrative. God sends the plagues of locust and darkness to Egypt, and we find, you know, this follow of oh, did I do that wrong? I think I did that wrong. I think that's a repeat, isn't it? Yeah, I think, sorry about that. I think hold on, is that, oh, hold on one second. One second, I want to make sure. I think that might be a duplication, that slide. Yeah, sorry. Okay, we are at Beshalach. Hold on one second. Sorry about that. That is actually the wrong slide. Beshalach is the wrong slide, so I'm not going to share that with you. But Beshalach is actually takes its name from, that's where we are, from the second word of the Torah portion, which means he sent forth, and refers to Pharaoh's decision to free the Israelites. But Pharaoh changes his mind, right? We know this, that there is a capitulation, right? And that then when the Israelites see Pharaoh and his army approaching, Pharaoh sends out his army. They complain to Moses that he's brought them into the wilderness to die, right? This is where we get our title of a kvetching people, right? That even though that we have been liberated, that they say, you know, why did you take us out of Egypt if in fact it's going to be this dire and we're going to be killed anyway, and we're not going to have our 3 square meals a day, we're not going to have what we know to be awful but tried and true, right? That we knew what to expect, and Pharaoh's armies are approaching. And from the other side, they watch as the pursuing, right? We know that the army is approaching. You tell me what happens in Beshalach that is noteworthy, right? Where are we approaching? What sea? What sea? Yes, Marcia.
The Red Sea.
Right. The Sea of Reeds, right? The Sea of Reeds. And from the other side, they watch the Israelites, right? The Hebrews watch the Pharaoh's army approaching. We know, right? This is where Micha Mocha comes from, right? This is where we sing with joy, right? And it's joy that the waters part allegedly, and we make our way through to safety, and that closes up on the Egyptian army. There are those who rightly say God must have also wept, right, that so many were killed. But how do we understand, right, a pursuing army and God's role in all of this, right? So God, the Israelites are both free, but aware of the cost of freedom. We see that cost now, right? We see that a necessary but difficult moment. So this is. Let me just make sure. I'm hoping that I did not mix these up. this should be Yitro. Let me just make sure. Yes, okay. And then we make it safely through. The people kvetch, right? The Israelites kvetch that though they have made it out of Egypt, they have no water to drink, no bread to eat. God grants them water and provides them with manna, right? With food that some say maybe resembles flour. We don't know. And the Israelites are camped at Rephidim, and they are attacked by the Amalekites. And Joshua, who has been appointed by Moses, successfully destroys the Amalekites. Is where we pick up in this next portion in Yitro, which translates into Jethro. Just check, make sure. Yes, okay. So here we have the story. This is the continuation of the journey of the Israelites across the Sinai desert before returning to Egypt, right? Moses had left his wife Zipporah and his two sons, Gershom and Eliezer. And Moses follows Yitro's advice and appoints judges to help him lead the people. This is a very important passage for us that talks about the shared, the importance of sharing leadership, right? The children of Israel camp in front of Mount Sinai and they wait. This is 3 months after they enter the Sinai desert. Moses has the people waiting at Mount Sinai. He goes to the top of Mount Sinai. God speaks to him, giving him the 10 Commandments, and below the people hear thunder and see lightning, and they remain frightened and at a distance and still skeptical and maybe not skeptical, but doubtful. And they remain there while Moses has this interaction, and Moses assures them and tells the people not to be afraid. Any questions about this passage so far?
Is this the appointing of judges? I mean, is this the beginning of sort of
shared leadership?
Yeah.
Yeah, this is the ground laying, yes, for that moment for shared judges, right? Which makes sense into Exodus and Leviticus, right? And to that shared leadership and evolution of us as a people and having a judicial system, right? Having a system, right? We're about to get the laws. We need someone to adjudicate those laws, right? And here are those rules, right? Next portion, mishpatim, right? This literally means mishpat means rules. This is Exodus 21 through 24. Let me just ask, is this, let me get a look. Is this too fast for anybody? No, okay. There are some of you who are seasoned and who know the story. It's a lot of history to cover in an hour. But are you getting kind of the gist of each of the parshiot, each of the portions, the Torah portions? They deserve a much deeper dive. Much more study is needed for each of this. This is really literally meant to be a summary look at each of our portions, and you could spend, as Bible study will tell you on Saturday morning, you can spend 2 months studying, a couple of parshiot, a couple of portions.
Rabbi Till?
Yes, please.
One question, something we just kind of passed over. Exodus 20. God spoke all these words saying, okay, well, no, sorry, I won't read it. I have enumerated, to me, it looks like 10 rules that I would have thought may have been the 10 commandments. But then Mishpatim 21, these are the rules. And I think I've had this explained to me before, but I'm not sure I remember. So I was wondering if, actually, I think
you're looking at Exodus 20 or Exodus, which?
20 and 21. So 20 at the end of, is that still Yitro? That's Yitro, right? And then we were just about to launch into Mishpatim, but which starts with 20.
This is the Decalogue. This is the 10 Commandments, right? So the beginning of chapter 20, verses 1 through 14, 17-ish.
Yeah.
Right. This is the start of the 10 Commandments.
Oh, okay. Just because okay, great. Thank you.
Okay. Okay. So here we are at Mishpatim. Make sure I have. Yes, okay. So this is the rules or the laws that govern the community, right? This is the interpersonal laws ranging from the treatments of slaves to kindness to strangers, everything. We find everything there in between. The cultic laws follow, including the commandment to observe a sabbatical year, a year where people let their fields rest, right? a repetition of Sabbath, the first mention of the 3 pilgrimage festivals. Bonus points for anybody who can tell us what the 3 pilgrimage festivals are.
Pesach, Shavuos, and Sukkot.
Nice. You get the gold star today. Good. Okay. And right, that we have the rules of sacrificial offerings, right? So this is, and the prohibition against boiling a kid in its mother's milk, right? That's where we get some of our kashrut, our laws around keeping kosher. This is really, right, when you think about where we've come from in a narrative perspective, right? When we look at Genesis and creation and just literally being planted, right? Figuring out, what an animal is, what the heavens and the skies are, who are people, who are some of our first important characters. This is our next section of right, that I don't know that we talked about the end of Genesis, taking us from Genesis to Exodus, and Jacob's children going to their brother Joseph in Egypt, which is how we get to Egypt, right? Because of a famine. Right, and so that's how they land in Egypt, and then they are eventually, there is enslavement, and then we come to liberation, right? But here is how we have become a people, but not really figuring out how to be a community of people. So this is the beginning of our story to understand how we are meant to live in community, what kinds of rules, what kinds of ethical rules, and what kinds of laws are needed for us to live in community together. Much is described about legal code for years after, and it gets its roots in Exodus and Leviticus. So this code of law talks about the treatment of slaves and injuries and damages and offenses through lying and witchcraft and idolatry and oppression, business practices, you name it, much of it is covered up here. And it also has a warning against doing evil, which is very much central in our teachings, along with directives for how to care for distressed animals, right? That this isn't just about how we get along as people, but how we it's called bal tashchit, how we are sure not to destroy our environment around us, which is also a core value in Judaism. And then we have finally our rules for Shabbat, and Pesach, Shavuot, and Sukkot are mentioned, as Rebecca noticed. And then at the very end of all this, the people agree to this covenant, and we hear Moses and Aaron and Nadab and Abihu and 70 elders of Israel ascend the mountain and see God. And Moses goes alone and spends 40 days on the mountain. And then the final words that we hear are, Moses gathers the people at Mount Sinai to offer sacrifices and declares all the things that God has commanded, we will do, right? So there is a tacit agreement that this is what we're going to do, a most important portion for us.
Rabbi, I have a question.
Please.
The word cultic law,
Yeah.
what does that mean in the text?
Right. So the temple, right? The temple cult. Right, so we have a temple cult, right? So all of our practices that are governed, right? There is, as we move forward, we're going to see into this next. Here we are in Truma, right? We have the next. We have the building of the tabernacle, right? And then we have this evolution. We're getting there, where we have the sacrificial system, right? Where we have to make offerings. And the way we make offerings at the temple, that is called, those are some of the cultic practices, right? The whole centrality of who and how and what the provisions are for making sacrifices.
So
and
it's
for
not
offerings.
a negative sort
It's
of
not pejorative. It's not
extremist.
It's not pejorative. It's not pejorative. Yeah. No, I appreciate the question, right? We use our 21st century sensibilities to read our text, and they don't always fit, right? So the words, and even conceptually, the things that we understand to be true, right? Stacy and I were just talking about it when we first got onto the call. The lens through which we look at the text, right? It is often where we, and certainly as liberal Jews, right, find friction, right? That we read this text and think, ugh. Right, and don't see it historically in its context, right? You can still read the text and think, right? There are those pieces that we ought to wrestle with, and that ought to still be horrifying or disruptive or upsetting. The temple cult as gross as it was, I mean, for those who are vegetarians among among the call, as gross as it probably was how they communicated with God. Right, that was how the Israelites communicated with God. They didn't have a direct conversation with God, and they didn't have a prayer life the way we do now. Right. Just a quick aside, the sacrificial system, the sacrificial cult, Susan, that you're asking about, is wholly WH replaced by the prayer system. Right, so where we would offer a sacrifice of forgiveness or of thanksgiving or of praise, now we have a prayer that is the equivalent of that. Okay, does that make sense? Okay, so here we are in Parshat Truma. This is Exodus 25. This is about building the first sanctuary or the tabernacle. Right, God asks for the children of Israel to donate gifts, trumot, for the building of the tabernacle, so that God may dwell among them, which is an important piece when we talk about the seeming portability, not to be crass, of God, right? But that God moves with us as we move. And these are the instructions for the construction of the ark, the actual physical construction of the table and the menorah, and they are incredibly specific and detailed descriptions about measurements and colors and oils that are used for lighting and anointing. And it's for those who are drawn. Actually, Susan, you and Roy might like how many colors and textures and items are described in Truma. For those who love detail, Truma speaks very specifically about how we are to construct the ark, and Moses is also instructed to build a menorah. Actually, this is the first time that we hear about a menorah out of hammered gold with 7 lamps. A menorah that we know has 7, right? 3 on each side and 1 in the middle. That's a menorah, commonly and mistakenly called that at Hanukkah. But we know, next person who gets the gold star next, for the difference between a menorah and a Chanukiah. Who knows the difference between a menorah and a Chanukiah?
No.
Hanukkah is 8 lights and the menorah is 7.
Right. So right, 6, right. So typically when you see a menorah, just a candelabra, right? That would be a menorah. Chanukiah is the one that we use specifically over the 8 nights of Hanukkah. So Truma really details the function of the Mikdash, the sanctuary in Jewish tradition, and really puts the emphasis for us to understand the Torah's emphasis on the details of how the sanctuary ought to be built. We come now, we're kind of in the home stretch. We come now to Titzaveh, which is you shall further instruct. So it's very Jewish, like I told you, but I'm going to tell you a little bit more because I'm not sure that you got it, right? The children of Israel are commanded to bring pure olive oil for the Ner Tamid. Who knows what the Ner Tamid is? Where do we see an iteration of the Ner Tamid?
Is that the eternal light above the ark?
It's the eternal light, right? In our sanctuary, actually, the sanctuary that we are so very much missing. It's actually closer to the side where typically I stand, and it is kind of red, right? Because the configuration of our ark doesn't allow, our ceiling doesn't allow it to be that high, right? So, but it is to be a constantly burning light to remind us of God's presence, God's constant presence. We have Aaron and his sons are chosen to serve as priests. This goes on, Susan, to your question. This is the furthering of the shared leadership and system of judges and priests, right? Jewish priests, right? God instructs Moses to make special clothes, and also beautiful, and for those who like detail, also beautiful passages about what the priests ought to be wearing, the colors and the breastplates, right? As much of which is how our Torah mantles and our Torah ornaments are designed around the priestly garb. And Aaron and his sons are ordained in a 7-day ceremony. Aaron is commanded to burn incense every morning and every evening, right? So this goes back to that notion of the cultic practices that are going to be coming, right? This is the ritualizing of our Judaism, right? This is how we embody our Judaism. This is how we learn to embody our Judaism, by what we wear and what we do, and then how we live in community, right? So this is what Tetzaveh offers us, and really concludes with the directions for building an altar and for burning incense before the ark, and really with a great deal of attention given to, interestingly, the priestly dress of Aaron and his sons. We don't often hear a lot about your clothing, except for where we talk about the priests and priestly garb.
Rabbi Till,
Yes, please.
2 random questions.
Yes.
One is, could part of the reason they might burn incense be to mask the smell from the sacrifice?
Right.
I mean, I don't know.
Right.
It seems to me if I had that smell lingering, I would do something to cover it up too, kind of like Febrezing the space.
Right. So there are right, and we're not even that far into the sacrament. We're not talking about sacrifices yet, but what do we know about burning of incense? Before we even get to sacrifices and offerings, what do we know about incense? When you burn an incense, incense, what happens, right? Smoke goes up, right? And we are told, we understand 2 things. One, that God must be pleased with our offering of incense, right? And the fragrance of incense, because the smoke goes up but doesn't come back down. We understand now, right, how smoke works, that it's not likely to, right? But it was, right, we can understand its importance, because in a time when the people are trying to figure out their relationship with God, this was one way to understand that, right? That they offered this gift to God, and it wasn't returned, and it wasn't regifted, right? Right? Yeah.
It just seems because it does follow, like, to me, I don't know if this is the first mention of the incense, but I did notice it in Exodus 30, and it's come right after this thing about the ram of ordination with Aaron and his sons and a lot of blood, and so anyhow, that's what I was thinking. And then I have a question going back a little bit, but in the construction of the ark section, what is it, the thing with the dolphin skin? Is that a mistranslation, or like where the heck does dolphin skin figure into?
Yeah, right. And where would you get dolphin skin?
There they are, right?
Right. And where would you get dolphin skin? Yeah, you know what? It has been perplexing for many for years. I'm just trying to see. Do you have the citation for dolphin skin?
We left that, but yeah. So in Turma in 25, 2, I guess. Gold, silver, copper, blue, purple, crimson, fine linen, goat's hairs, all these normal things, tanned ram skins. I get that, where they are. Dolphin skins and acacia wood. Oh, oil for lighting, spices for the anointing oil, aromatic incense. So it's not the first. So I was, missed one, but.
So I'm doing the Daf Yomi, and it seems like there's a lot of references to weird animals. I think there's even a unicorn in there. And I never did see a really good reason, as a really good explanation of that, other than, it was just something that was locally present and probably wasn't an actual unicorn or an actual dolphin, but this is the only translation that we have, or something.
Let me tell you both Susan and Rebecca. Let me tell you what my note says about dolphin, because it's a good question given where they are geographically, right? How could that be, right? So the Hebrew, with one exception of dolphin, is tehashim, I think, right? Tehash is a singular. It always refers to the covering of the tabernacle. That's the only way it's used, and this is what our sages say. Its exact meaning is uncertain. Right? In rabbinic times, it was invested with mythical association and identified with the unicorn, Rebecca, right? Mm-hmm. Because of the similarity with the Arabic word, which it denotes the dolphin and the dugong found in the Red Sea. Modern scholars have variously identified the biblical creature with one or the other, right? Whether the dolphin or this dugong. I don't know that animal. Do you know that? Yeah, I don't know.
Never heard
right?
of it.
Right. I mean, there's a whole there's a biblical garden. There are biblical animals that we know about as well. A suggestion to equate the term seems to be a stretch for most of the scholars, and essentially what our sages have said is not sure. Not sure, right,
He's
not
Just-
sure.
chose
Just
it.
looked up, a dugong apparently is a manatee.
Oh, that's interesting. That's interesting. Yeah. Yeah, Susan, it's a good question. It's a good question for sure. Okay, so this is Titzaveh. We're just coming to our last two parshiot. Hold on one second. Okay, and this is Ki Tisa. This is the second to last portion.
Census.
Say again? Oh, okay. This is where we have Moses taking a census. God instructs Moses to collect a half shekel from every person over the age of 20 and to take a census of the community. God also tells Moses to construct a water basin and prepare. We have more of the anointing oil. Susan, I like your image of Febrezing the space. It's a very contemporary look, and incense for the ordination of priests. Here we have our first mention of Bezalel and Oholiab, the skilled artisans who really, there's a school of art in Israel called Bezalel in Jerusalem, and they are assigned to make the objects for the priests. There's so much attention in the tabernacle, so very much attention given to their garb and the construction of the tabernacle. I should have shown you this picture. I should have put it up for you to look at. I don't know if I hold it up, if you'll be able to see this picture. Can you see that?
Mhm.
No, yes, yeah.
Sort of.
Sort of, kind of. Okay, I will. I should have put that up, but the actual construction of the outer court and the Holy of Holies and the inner court, right? So elaborate, so very elaborate, and so there's so much that the specificity for how that space is to be made is really it's so many verses that are dedicated to it. It tells us immediately of how important this is, right? How much attention, how much color and texture and measurements and the literal construct of it are governed, right? That this is supposed to be the holiest of places, right? The Israelites are instructed to keep Shabbat as a sign of their covenant with God, right? Don't get too far away from the source. And God gives Moses the 2 tablets of the pact, right? The Israelites ask Aaron to build them a golden calf. This is where you do the thump, thump, thump music, right? Moses implores God not to destroy the people and then breaks the 2 tablets of the pact on which the 10 commandments are written when he sees the idol. And God punishes the Israelites by means of the plague. So why did they build this golden calf, right? They were apprehensive, right? While they enjoyed their freedom. And then some say they had gotten arrogant and complacent in their freedom, and had forgotten from whence they cometh, and were, for lack of a better term, nudgy, waiting for Moses, right? And not at all confident that he was going to come back with anything substantive, and God punishes the Israelites by means of a plague. So Moses goes up onto the mountain with a blank set of tablets for another 40 days. This is the second trip up, and so that God will again inscribe the 10 commandments and other laws that would hold for us as a people. Moses comes down from the mountain, we know, with a radiant face because he has had this encounter with God. This portion also, right, these 3-4 chapters, so rich, right? We move from the the taking of a census, also quite germane to us in this past year, where we were also charged with doing that, knowing who's who in the community, although it is lopsided, right? Who gets counted is certainly lopsided and from a certain perspective. And then Moses is commanded to remind the people that in observing Shabbat and their covenant with God, that this is who they are meant to be in terms of their brit, their pact with God. And then the Torah shifts us back to the story of Mount Sinai and going back to Moses standing on Sinai. So this is where, for critical biblical analysis, right, there's some people who wonder about the stitching together of our texts. And another conversation for another time, but how those two kind of go together. And then we come to our last portion. Actually, these are 2 portions. Let me see if I can go back. right? Vayakel, this is Moses assembled. You'll see in the Hebrew word, whether you know the Hebrew, you can see it in the language, in the Hebrew characters up here. Kuf He Lamed, Kahal, right? That is, when you come into our parking lot, you see on our sign, there is a Kuf Kuf, and it stands for Kehila Kedusha, right? That we are a holy community, right? That we're a holy assembling, right? So this is Moses assembled the people. Moses here teaches the rules of Shabbat and asks the Israelites for a donation of gifts for those who are able to, each according to their ability. This is one of the 7 designated Torah portions that, depending on the number of Shabbatot that we have during the year, is either read on its own or together with the next portion, which is Pikudei, which we'll get to in one second. But again, we find a repetition of the commandment for Shabbat. Some more talk about asking the Israelites to donate gifts of gold and silver and copper and precious stones. And then eventually they report to Moses that the people are that they have enough and that they should stop giving gifts. And then this is our last portion. Sometimes, like I say, these two are Vayakel and Pikudei are read together, depending on how they need to be broken up. This is our very last portion in the book. This is the records of the tabernacle. This is the records of all the work and the materials that were used in the construction of the Mishkan, of the tabernacle. And Moses and the Israelites celebrate by anointing it, and God's presence fills the sanctuary and leads the people. This will be, our understanding of the cloud that covers, God's ability to be with us in the wilderness, right? That God's with us in Egypt, God's with us in Sinai, and well, the question is God with us in Egypt, and that God is with us in Sinai, and this is where Pikudei ends our story. So it ends our story and our book. And we also have some notion of the obligation to give tzedakah and the accountability of public officials, also quite timely right now. So that is our whirlwind look. Let me find out what your questions are. Yeah, Susan, or Lisa rather, sorry.
Yeah, I'm just curious. Exodus seems to play a huge part in Judaism from what I can see. And I'm wondering, comparative religions with other Judeo-Christian religions who study the Torah, the Old Testament, do they place, where do we see evidence of them placing huge amounts of, importance on these stories?
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. It's such a good question. Look, we know for certain in Christianity, Genesis is also a central book, right? And the story of the Garden of Eden is pivotal in theological formation, right? I think each of the Abrahamic faiths, Lisa, if that's what you're asking about, right? Judaism, Christianity, and Islam, each place prominence on all 5 books, right? Those are our shared, right? Our shared, much of our shared narrative. It's a good question. That something came up yesterday morning. Liz, maybe you remember, somebody was talking about the Quran story. I think it was Julian or Rebecca. Were you there yesterday morning also in Torah study?
I was, and they were talking about whether or not Ishmael was one of the attendants for Isaac's Akedah.
Right, for the binding of Isaac, right. So we see the binding of Isaac from the story of Abraham and Isaac, father and son, father taking son to be sacrificed. And in the Muslim community, Ishmael, right, Isaac's first son with his handmaiden Hagar has prominence, and was Ishmael actually one of the attendants in that story, right? And the perspective from which we see that story. So Lisa, it's a good question. I think you would have to, I think also it would depend on the denomination within Christianity to know which book has prominence, right? Some of the more prophetic books take central position, but it's a good question, not for me to answer. It's an interesting question that would be an interesting adult ed at some point when we're all together.
Thank you.
Yeah, Josh, please, or Sheva, I'm not sure which one of you.
Yeah, so I was struck, seeing the parashot kind of one after another. The God of Exodus is a lot more like one of the Greek gods in some ways than the God that we, especially today, understand it.
Right.
And I wonder, is that seems like a source of a lot of the tension in religious interpretation. This God is really not the God that we in the 21st century really picture him to be in a lot of ways.
Right. So it's such an important point you bring up, right? The creative God in Genesis feels very different than the redemptive God, the both punitive God, right, where Pharaoh and the army are concerned, and the redemptive God, right, who takes us out of slavery, and then the God that clearly needs our worship and our praise, right, that so much detail is given to the structures that we have for praising God and worshiping God, right? Yeah, very different, right? And then so too with Leviticus, Numbers, and Deuteronomy as well, we're going to see a very different essence of God. Important for us for our complete picture, right, of a biblical God and how very different that God is. Judy, please. And then we'll close.
As we were going through this, I didn't hear when we were given the Torah. I thought that happened at Mount Sinai. But Moses just came down twice with the 10 Commandments.
Who wants to try their hand at that one? Liz, go ahead.
You think of it as 10 Commandments. Supposedly, the entire Torah was contained on these tablets somehow or other.
Okay.
Oral.
Susan, go ahead.
Oh, I mean, like all forms of it too, right?
Right. So written, oral, right? How we understand the Torah. It's a good question, right? A whole other class is how much is missing, right? How much is missing from, right? What doesn't exist in between the verses of our text, right? What don't we know? Where are there gaps, right? Where are there gaps? So, any last questions before we wrap up? Yes, Marcia, please.
I was struck by how when the people of Israel left Egypt, they sort of fled, and suddenly they have all these resources for making clothes for the priests. They have shekels. It is they become a community,
right,
while wandering around in the desert, and that is very striking.
Right. Well, what did they bring with them out of Egypt? Right. Who else came with them out of Egypt? Right. Who made it out of Egypt with them? And then what resources did they collect over the years? Right. A whole other conversation. Right. Let alone how did we get dolphin skins? Right. Right. Thank you, everybody. Good to learn with you as always. And if during the week, there are things that come up that we didn't cover that you have questions about, let me know, and I will endeavor to answer them during the week. Keep safe and well, as I wished everybody on Friday night and again yesterday, and I will do it again. I'm praying for an uneventful week with all of you and a healthy week. Join us this afternoon if you just want to have an open table discussion about where things are. There's no fixed agenda. Just come if you want to be with us this afternoon at 5 o'clock. And wishing everybody good health, and those who are getting vaccinated, we're happy for you. We're happy and hoping it sits well in your body and protects you from all the things that you need. And I'll look forward to seeing you during the week. Okay. Take care, everybody. Take care.
Thank you, Rabbi.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.